Welcome, my friend. How are you? Come on in. It's great to see you. Come and meet everybody.
Oh my God, this is intimidating. Hi.
I've shared just the teeniest bit about you. Essentially what I've said is that I think you're a wonderful person and that I'm so grateful that you're here and that we have this opportunity. I haven't said much about your sort of the what you bring that's so skillful to the law, what you bring that's so skillful to business, what you bring that I think is so skillful to friendships, what I know of you in terms of your family, and your own life, and just sort of resilient, and you know, like we all have challenging life moments, and also very generous with your community and with people. So that's the introduction of Steve Zuckerman.
Wow, that's a good introduction.
And this is the class. Brilliant, fun, funny, curious. This one's not as curious as I'd like him to be. And a real treat to be with. We only have a couple more classes together, so I'm going to try not to miss these moments.
Well, thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. I've got some fond memories of this place. I was here in your seats 25 years ago, which is hard to imagine. So I graduated Law School in 1998. I met my wife here, who now goes by the name Professor Zuckerman. Yes. Some of you had her, maybe?
She's my professor.
Oh. I'll keep it PG then. And you guys are so lucky to have this class. I wish I had this class when I was in law school, and I have so much respect for Scott and admiration. He's taught me a ton about mindfulness and meditation and Eastern philosophy. And in my view, this is probably one of the most important things you could be doing with your time at UM, and legal research and writing, of course, which is what my wife teaches. It's just an amazing opportunity to learn about how our minds work and to more skillfully navigate our ways through our days and our weeks and years, and to improve in all aspects of our life. So I'm not going to talk about the technical aspects of mindfulness because you got a way better teacher than me, although I've been pretty active in meditating and mindfulness practice for about 10 years. I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about, by the way, how long do you want me to talk?
Well, 3 years, but short of that, and 3 hours short of that, let's say until 11:15, 11:20?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll give 15 or so minutes at the end. We could talk, and this should be interactive. So I've been at it for about 10 years, and again, Scott's a way better teacher and knows a lot more about this stuff than I do. But I think what would be helpful, what I would want to know if I were you, is how to improve my life. Like, how to improve all aspects of my personal and professional life. And I wish somebody came into a classroom when I was sitting in your seat and gave me some tips and secrets. And I'm not sure if they're secrets that I'm going to share, but they're my experience. So I'll go more heavily on my experience and my life, and I'll be pretty vulnerable and share some stuff with you, and I think that's important because it's important for me to recognize how much of an impact mindfulness, meditation, Eastern philosophy has played in improving all facets of my life. So it all comes down to this, egg-shaped thing that sits on top of our shoulders, right? Like, it's a fantastic supercomputer, but it is determining the quality of our life one thought at a time. And we don't see the world clearly. We see and react to life and stimulus and information and situations based upon our personal experience, our genetics, our predisposition, our biases, most of which operate at a subconscious level and we have no awareness of. And they tell us, our minds tell us stories constantly, all day. And most of the times I found not true, highly exaggerated. I like to say that when I talk about my life and what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago, It's like those movies that say based on a true story. I do my best to tell what I think happened, but our memories and our minds can't really be trusted, especially when you think about a long time ago. So I spent a lot of time trying to improve my relationship with reality and to see more clearly and objectively. And mindfulness is the essence of doing that. I like to think of my brain as one of these snow globes that all day it's shaken up. And these snowy little particles prevent you from seeing. Like, you've all been into gift shops, you take those globes, you go like this, it's, a fun little trick, and you can't see, and then if you let it settle down, 20, 30 seconds later, everything is clear. And with mindfulness, I get to see how email comes in, reaction, snow particle, can't see clearly, or I could just be driving and for no reason start ruminating about something in the past, 2 years ago, 2 weeks ago, 20 years ago. And it brings up some person I'm angry at, I'm resentful, I start planning revenge, and it wasn't fair, and it's just like completely useless. But it's what happens. And on the other side of it is living in the future. It could be 1 minute from now, 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, 10 years. What am I going to be? Am I going to get a job when I graduate? I paid a lot of money for this education. Is it worth it? Do I want to be a lawyer? Being a lawyer is hard. Who am I doing this for? It's like, well, it's a lot. It's a lot of anxiety and worry, and all pretty much useless too. So why do our brains do this? Because our brains cause us a lot of havoc, and I'm often amazed at how capable our minds are. We can split atoms, we can create energy, we can light cities and countries, we can send people to Mars, we can cure diseases and create vaccines. We can do a lot of really cool stuff, but we just can't seem to shut this thing up for more than 5-10 seconds at a time. That keeps us living in the past or projecting and catastrophizing what might happen in the future. And so a big part of my journey has been trying to just figure out why. Like, if it's so annoying to do that, to live in the past and live in the future, like, why does our mind do that? And one of the most helpful things I learned is that our mind doesn't really care about happiness, contentment, joy. It cares about survival, right? Like, we are destined and programmed to survive, to get our genes to the next generation. In that equation, being happy and having fun is not really part of it. We want to have fun and experience joy and contentment. So our brain is just doing what it was designed to do over the thousands and thousands of years. Obsess over things, right? Like, somebody said something to you, hurt your feeling, you obsess. Yeah, like, let's really figure that out. Let's tell a bunch of people about that person did this to me. Let's avoid that person. Let's whatever. Trivial things, but they build and they can just weigh on our minds, and things that happened in the past. Why do we obsess about them? Well, because our brain wants us to avoid that danger in the future. So it's good to be safe and protective and anxious. It's not so good for happiness and contentment, but it's good for safety, security, and survival. So I'll tell you a little bit about sort of my journey and how I learned these things and why these are important to me. I grew up in New York City, Queens. Anybody from New York? Nobody from New York?
New Jersey.
Put your hand down. It's not New York. No, it's close enough. So I grew up in a place called Queens, inner city, tough neighborhood. I grew up in subsidized housing. We had 10 or 12-foot chain link fence that surrounded our apartment buildings. And we had this really bad housing project called Hamels, like 2 blocks away, that, if you've ever seen housing projects or the movies, like these really dense buildings, one on top of each other, that are just sort of, in some part of it, just people that are down on their luck and can't afford to live elsewhere, and other part of it, just complete lawlessness and danger. And so that was a big part of my experience growing up, just living in a pretty dangerous neighborhood. When I was 3 months old, my father was robbed and murdered, which was a pretty traumatic event for me and my family, as you might expect, which had a lot to do with things that happened afterward, right? Because even though I was a baby, my brother was 21 months old, and that imprints you for a lot of reasons. I had a stepfather that came into my life when I was about 4 or 5 or 6 that was kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, like at times a pretty amazing guy, loving, doting, caring, generous, And then other times, kind of blind rage, just some small thing could set him off, and he would be sometimes verbally violent, sometimes physically violent. And you had to be on eggshells because you didn't know what version of him you were going to get. My brother was 21 months older than me, and he and I shared a bunk bed. And we lived in this small apartment. It wasn't poverty, but it wasn't a lap of luxury. We had one bathroom, and it was me, my brother, my mother, stepfather, one of my stepbrothers who was a bit older. And my brother and I, we would just fight every day. I mean, we were extremely Neanderthal-ish, if that's a word, with each other. We just did not know how to communicate with words, so it was just start with a little wrestling match, and next thing you know, we were in fist fight, choking each other. We've stabbed each other a few times, just like terrible stuff. I have two daughters. They've never hit each other. If they yell at each other once in a while, we're like, oh my God, this is terrible. My brother and I would destroy our apartment. Like, my mom could not control us. She would have to lock us out in the hallway sometimes. It was tough to deal with, but it was a manifestation of how we grew up. We grew up in a neighborhood where people fought, and my stepfather was volatile and unpredictable, and he and I just fought. Unfortunately, my brother could not figure out his way, not that I did much better when I was his age, and he got into more trouble than I did, and unfortunately he passed away of a drug overdose when he was 24, 25 years old. Pretty shortly after I graduated law school, actually, here. And I wound up going to a high school that my mom and stepfather thought was a great idea because it had a great reputation, but it really was undeserving. It was a public high school in New York that people thought highly of 30, 40, 50 years ago. But when I went, it was in a war zone in Brooklyn, even a worse neighborhood than I grew up in. I grew up playing basketball, and so I had a lot of somewhat, I wouldn't say a lot, some street cred because I could play pretty well. I went to a neighborhood that was an hour and a half away that I didn't know anybody, and it was way worse than where I grew up. And so I was literally in fear a lot of my childhood. It wasn't like every day, oh my God, I'm terrified, but getting on that subway, and if anybody ever rode the A train in New York back in the 80s, was you did not know what was gonna happen to you that day. Like, a lot of stuff went down, and I don't look like the toughest guy that's gonna go beat up a bunch of people, so I was a pretty good target, and it wasn't fun. It was a lot of fear and anxiety, and I don't trivialize going to war because I've not been in the military, but I was going into combat every day. Like, I was concerned as soon as I got on that train, went to school until I got back, that something was gonna happen, because oftentimes something did happen. So anyway, that's the backstory of a lot of uncertainty, some family trauma and tragedies and violence and weird stuff. Then I go to college at Boston University. I was one of the few people where I grew up, maybe the only person, and I got lucky because I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Long Island. I saw a little bit of a different life. I went to a summer camp that I saw a little bit of a different life. And so the seed was planted, like that's a different way that I want to pursue, and I got into BU, and I got a scholarship, and I got some financial aid because I couldn't afford to go there. And I met all these different people, like rich people. I was like, what are you guys up to? Boarding schools? What's boarding school? And they introduced me to, I never really drank and did other stuff. Like, they introduced me to alcohol and this other stuff and all this freedom and safety. I walk out my dorm, I was like, I'm not gonna get my ass kicked today. This is a pretty good day. And then I'd come home, and it was so weird because I'd come back to the same world. I was like, I'm hanging out with these affluent kids in Boston. I walk back home, and people get into fights. And I remember one summer, I stayed home, and one of my best friends growing up, this Puerto Rican kid, his nickname was Poppy. Yeah, that's a good nickname for a Puerto Rican kid, right? And Poppy was always really tough, but didn't usually start the trouble, but was good at ending. And I sometimes got us into trouble with a big mouth, and I was like, hey, Poppy, why don't you finish this off for me? And we went to different high schools, and we were, I think, like 16 or 17, maybe juniors, and he had done something pretty trivial, but again, growing up the way I did was deemed an offense. He stepped on somebody's shoe by accident, and that person was a thug from one of the local projects and was like, hey, you gotta, clean off my shoe. And he's like, I'm not cleaning your shoe. And they caught him after school, like 7 or 8 of them, and like stabbed him and cut him, and he got like 700 stitches with a box cutter. He was in the hospital for a while over something just so stupid. And he came out, and over time I saw it more where he became kind of the mentality of you can't beat him, join him. And my brother sort of had that mentality, and he became a drug dealer, and he was very smart. He was like me, like we had intelligent conversations, we knew how to navigate, and he would have been a business guy, and he became an entrepreneur, except selling stuff that's illegal. And one summer I'm home from BU, and one leg in that world and one leg back where I grew up, and I see him. I hadn't seen him about 9 months, a year. By that time already, he had an organization working for him, and he was successful in that world. And I saw him, and I'm like, hey, why don't you just come walk with me this way? Let's talk, let's catch up. And all his friends were about, 2-3 blocks down. And next thing you know, one of his friends walks up to him and says, hey, Poppy, these are the kids from last week that did so-and-so. I mean, it's like the movies. That's how things go on in the hood. It's so ridiculous. But they're basically asking his permission to go retaliate against some guys they had a fight with a month ago. So he's like, yeah, whatever, go do whatever you're doing. And so maybe a block down, I see this fight start breaking out, and so I'm like normal, I'm like, okay, no problem. 30 seconds later, you start hearing pop, 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 and one of the guys that they jumped had a gun and started shooting, and he grabbed me, threw me down, and shots are flying where we're standing, and his friend gets shot in the mouth, comes running back our direction, has a hole, it's holding his face like this, he's bleeding, and it was just a wild scene. I'm coming from a frat party in Boston, and I'm here now, Boys in the Hood, with my buddy, friend, shot in the mouth, and you hear the sirens coming, and they're telling me, I had a car nearby, hey, we need your car. You need to take us here, because they were smart enough not to carry weapons, because the cops knew who they were, and it's like, take us here to the safe house to get, I'm like, I'm not taking you guys, no, I'm out of here. And like, one of the guys, his friends, almost got violent with me because I wouldn't take him, and the poppy stepped in and was like, no, this is like my brother, man, and it just, stuff like that happened. I thought, I need to get out of this world and go back to this other one. But over time, as I made that transition to kind of a different way of living and different types of friends, I stayed close with, and I'm still close with some of my friends I grew up with. They all, Poppy went to jail for a long time, as you might imagine, and I haven't talked to him in a few years. But other friends are firefighters or sanitation workers or one's a teacher, like, all very admirable and hard job, a lot harder stuff than I do. Like I press keyboards all day. But those guys became a less part of my life, and I pursued money, success, ambition, and I never really wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So graduate college, I come down here to Miami, and I'm like, I'm gonna do the startup thing. This is late 90s, technology companies were just coming about. Graduated UM Law School and did this whole startup thing that did okay for a while and then crashed, and then wound up working for, after that, trying to figure out what the next business move was. Have they met John Kozak?
Some may know him, but not from the class.
So he's a great lawyer in town, retired now, named John Kozak, one of the best to ever come out of probably Florida. Cheryl, my wife, worked for him, and he became a bit of a mentor, and he said, I know you don't want to be a lawyer, but why don't you go meet this guy, and I think you ought to be a lawyer for a little bit, because if some of you don't want to be lawyers and you think you want to be entrepreneurs or business people, I'm happy to talk to you about that. Legal education is phenomenal, but without learning how to really apply it in a practical way, you're not going to get the full value, which ultimately I learned. So he introduced me to a guy named Paul Singerman, who they met? No.
Not yet.
Amazing. Best lawyer I've ever met, and I've met a lot. And somehow I left the friendly get-together with a job and worked with Paul for a number of years. And then I wanted to switch back into business. I went into investment banking, and then I wanted to start another software company, so I did that, which I currently own. And everything's going great until about 11 or 12 years ago. My mother, who I was very close with, we'd been through a lot, so her husband, my father dying, my brother dying, lots of other nonsense. got really sick and very quickly went from, she got diagnosed with lung cancer, she was a lifelong smoker, to procedure after procedure, and nothing was going to work, and she died within like 5 or 6 or 7 months, and it was really something I wasn't prepared for. I didn't have the tools to deal with, and I just sank into like this really dark, deep depression. And at the same time, all of the things that I thought would make me eternally happy, because subconsciously in my mind, I figured out that, that fear I had, like taking the train and issues with violence and whatever, if I just make a lot of money and if I'm really successful and I get a lot of accolades and adoration and all that stuff, everything's gonna be great. But then I got a bunch of that stuff and everything wasn't great. So it's like, oh, have I been chasing a false dream for 25 years? And then these other coping mechanisms that I developed also started not working, and I just sat there just miserable and depressed and couldn't figure out the way out of that situation. And fortunately, somebody introduced me to somebody and something clicked, and started learning about a different way of living and mindfulness and practicing principles as opposed to talking about principles and theorizing and trying to be intellectual at a party about some book I read. And it started with really understanding, again, the mind, how it works. It's programmed over 50,000 years for survival, not happiness or contentment. That I've confused my end goals with the means, and that money, success, ambition, achievement, accolades, these things they're perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But to confuse them with delivering what I actually want, which I think is what most people want, joy, happiness, contentment, unshakable sense of peace, serenity, equanimity, like these are things I want. Those things don't deliver. Spoiler alert, sorry. They're fine, they're good, but they're not going to, all the external validation in the world is not going to fix internal holes and problems and issues. And so I just went on a journey to fix some stuff, and I never really dealt with the self-pity, the resentments, the insecurities, the fears, and really through a foundation of a bunch of stuff, but mindfulness, like really learning how this thing works, and through meditation every day, paying attention to the thoughts that arise, and really realizing that thoughts have no power but power that I give them. And we have the capacity to give our thoughts a lot of power. Right? We have a negative thought, whatever it might be, we start feeding the thought becomes bigger, that thought becomes an emotion. Now it's a lot more difficult to unwind. And then the coping mechanisms, whatever they are, could be mind-numbing social media scrolling, could be alcohol, could be drugs, could be relationships, gambling, workaholism, whatever. There's lots of ways to cope, because me and others don't like to deal with those emotions, and most of us don't have awareness of what's going on. So once I started kind of unraveling it and figuring it out, I like figuring stuff out. I started to develop an acronym, which I'll talk about briefly, and you could shut me up whenever you want, but that I use as an operating plan, kind of a blueprint for living. Because I think most of us walk around without a blueprint, right? Just wake up, go to class, do this, do that, hope we have a good day, repeat next day, not sure if we had a good day what we did right, if we had a bad day what we did wrong. I had enough bad days in a row to realize I didn't want that unpredictability, or I wanted to try to mitigate it. I can't control everything. So I developed this acronym called SMASH. I'll tell you briefly what each letter means, and I live by it, or I try my best to live by it every day. So the S in SMASH stands for spirituality, and I'm not gonna sit up here and pretend to be some guru on spirituality. I'm not qualified to do it. I didn't sit in some Buddhist temple meditating for 50 years. I'm not sure if that's what the qualification is, but in any event, at the end of the day, having pursued material success, 15 hours a day for many years, I realized that there's more to the material world than meets the eye. Whether you believe in a God of your understanding, a life force, an energy, a higher power, whatever it is, I believe that there is some kind of energy, and I'm not sure that it controls things, people, places, but to me, unifying my thoughts and behaviors with some energy that's bigger than me, and trying to act in accordance with principles that are meaningful to me, like kindness, love, compassion, gratitude, honesty, and humility. I think about those things every day, because left to my own devices, I will do the opposite. I will do arrogance, selfishness, self-centeredness, egotism. So I view it as I'm pretty bad with directions if I don't plug in ways. I went to school here for 3 years. I still plug in University of Miami Law School to get here because I zone out. I listen to podcasts constantly. I will get lost. I view it as my mind in the morning, like part of my morning routine, is I plug this stuff in as my coordinates for the day, because I will get lost and I come back to them. Like, I want to act in accordance with those principles. Why? Because my life and everybody's life is better when I do. I've seen the result of when I don't, okay? The M is for mindfulness. You guys might be familiar with that concept, right? That's what we do here. I've talked a bit about that, but it's just paying careful attention without judgment to my thoughts, and trying not to feed them and take them too seriously, because most of them are either exaggerations, inaccurate. What's interesting about being a lawyer, you guys will all be lawyers soon, we're super skillful at taking facts and making arguments. That's sort of what we do, right? The challenge is we can delude ourselves, right? We have the capacity to delude ourselves into thinking that our interpretation of the story we're telling ourselves is actually true. In my experience, a lot of times it's not, or it's biased to achieve the objective that we want. So just really practicing through meditation. I meditate every day. I have meditated every day for over 10 years. I have a theory about myself. It's easier to do something 100% than 96% or 85% or 99%, because once I start dialing something back and get the same results, I'm like, oh, maybe I don't need to do it 100%. So I haven't missed a day of meditating in 10 years. My meditation practice isn't perfect. Sometimes it's 12 minutes, sometimes it's 22 minutes. I used to time it. I used to be really rigid. I used to ask God all the time, how much time do I need to meditate? He's like, relax. I don't know. Take it easy first. So I used to have a timer. I used to do all these things. I've gone on meditation retreats. Now I just sit. And I just sit for a time that I know is more than 10 minutes and less than 30 minutes. It's good enough for me today. And I just watch. I watch the craziness. I watch the obsessive thinking. I got into playing tennis 2 years ago, and I can apply my obsessive thinking to everything I do. So I'm totally obsessed with tennis. And Scott has heard my stories of I'll lose and I'll beat myself up for, this doesn't matter, right? Like, I'm not gonna be a professional tennis player. Nobody cares. My wife and kids are so sick of hearing about my tennis matches. But it's what my obsession is focused on these days. And sometimes I laugh at it because it's funny. Sometimes it's irritating. But in any event, it's all here. I often marvel at, I don't think about my heart beating 60 beats a minute, thousands of times a day. I don't think about my lungs doing their job, the blood flowing, none of that stuff. All I do is I tend to think about 4 things, and most of us think about. How do I get more comfort, control, security, and significance? And the day determines what order those go in. And then I want more of that and less of anything that's in my way to get more of that. And so then again, mindfulness brings me back to like, oh, I'm just sort of obsessing over this thing that it's not really going to matter if I get it. It's just my fixation for the moment, day, week, or month. So mindfulness is really the foundation of all of this for me. A is autonomy. I found that to have a enjoyable life for me anyway, I need to have some sense of autonomy, some sense of control of what I'm doing, who I'm spending time with, how I'm spending my time. I have a lot of interests in different things. I don't want to be sitting at my desk 13 hours a day like I used to. Paul Singerman, who I used to work with, is, I think, the best corporate restructuring lawyer that exists. Maybe I'm biased, but he's extraordinary. He also required a 15-hour dedication to your office chair every day. I mean, that's what I used to do there. And this is more of a practical tip, getting outside kind of the zone of mindfulness for a second. As young lawyers, you're not maybe going to have much control over your schedules and too much autonomy. You're going to be learning your craft. Your job is not to go in there and be like, hey, you know what? I want to work 4 hours a day and do yoga in the middle of the afternoon. Is that okay? Right? That's not going to fly too well. But if you start developing and rounding out your skills early so that you're not just myopically focused in whatever you're specializing in, you're very helpful to colleagues. You are going out of your way to make connections and help those connections succeed. Within a few years, you could start figuring out how to round out your life. And it wasn't until I transformed or transitioned into investment banking and learned how to generate clients and revenue and ran a division that I realized, for me anyway, I don't want to be measured by time. I want to be measured by results. And if I work 2 hours a day and produce amazing results, that's better than working 12 hours a day and building time. Now, I did build time for a bunch of years. That's just the path. Ultimately, I would say strive for autonomy in your life, because contentment and happiness has a lot to do with being able to control who you spend your time with, how you spend your time, doing things that matter, being there for family. The S stands for service. Service was completely counterintuitive to me. I grew up, again, not doing service. Grew up in a lower middle class family where we weren't taking handouts, but we were not going to do service projects on the weekend. I learned a concept called enlightened self-interest. So we're all selfish, self-centered. It's like how we're programmed to be. But if I'm helpful to other people, I'm briefly out of that selfish, self-centered mindset. And it's actually really rewarding to use your skills, and it doesn't have to be money, but skills, experience, know-how, relationships to help somebody improve their life. A bunch of years ago, I started a program teaching mindfulness meditation in elementary school where my daughters went, which I couldn't have done without Scott helped me develop the foundation, the kernel of the program. Because again, I'm a good amalgamation of a bunch of skills, but I don't have a lot of expertise in anything, if I'm being really. Is the video on here? Is this going to get to my partners? I have private equity partners. I tell them I have a lot of expertise in a lot of stuff. But the reality is, I know what I know and I know what I don't, and I know when I need help. And I said, Scott, I got the school on board to do this. Will you help me develop the program? He's an expert. We developed it. And me and a couple of other people, parents, launched this, which caught on to be a school-wide initiative, every classroom for a bunch of years. I also started a nonprofit called Rise Up, where I teach, interestingly enough, called Mindful Entrepreneurship in Prison. I haven't been able to go back since COVID, but I always thought since my formative years and my experience with people like Poppy, that a lot of people who are selling drugs and engaging in other criminal activity are very smart entrepreneurs. They are actually being entrepreneurs. They are just doing stuff that's illegal. And if you spend some time in their shoes, you'd probably be doing the same thing they'd be doing, right? Like when you come from broken homes and violence and lack of resources, people can talk all they want in the ivory tower about how they wouldn't do certain things, but they probably would. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to help them transition that instinct, those innate skills, into being legitimate entrepreneurs? And so I'd go into prison, teach a 7-8 week course on developing a business plan and taking an idea and pitching the idea. And at the end, we'd have a pitch competition, kind of like Shark Tank in jail. And it was, I did it for a bunch of years, and it was humbling and it was rewarding, and you get to see how. I'd ask them in the beginning, how many of you graduated? Anybody go to college? Nobody. Anybody graduate high school? One person. It would be a room about this many people, 15, 25 people. What was the highest grade? 8th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade. Lack of education, lack of resources. And what I found was one of the most meaningful parts going in there. My idea was I'm going to teach them how to take that. I buy an ounce of whatever and make it into smaller pieces and sell it for that. I thought, we're going to spend a lot of time on that. What became the most rewarding is actually talking about mindfulness and how they process thoughts, and they had no concept of that. So again, you guys are so lucky to be taught by somebody who's an expert, right? Like one of the most revered teachers, I think, in the country on this. And they were like, wow, I'm blown away. I never even heard of this. Mindfulness and snow globe analogies and all that stuff. So I did that for a bunch of years, and then I started helping people on the outside, which has been great. And the last part, H, is health. So there's 4 components of health for me. It's sleeping, eating, exercising, and negativity, avoiding negativity. I always remember stuff with acronyms, so SEEN, that's another acronym. So sleeping, I try to get 7 to 8 hours every day. I'm very religious about my sleep schedule. If anybody has my wife as a professor, you can ask her about it. At 10 o'clock, I'm upstairs. I have 2 daughters that are teenagers. They're doing their thing downstairs. They're up way later than I am. Everybody's got to be quiet because it's time for me to go to bed. I'm up early. Without getting regular sleep, everything becomes more difficult. Eating well. A bunch of years ago, I stopped eating meat. I'm not proselytizing. It's what I did. I still like junk food here and there. I still like chocolate, but I eat pretty clean. I exercise every day. Again, I've gotten obsessed with tennis. It's hard to believe, almost 50 years old, and I'm proud to run 20-year-olds off the court because I just will run all day. And I feel blessed and grateful that I can do that. I don't take anything. I don't take anything stronger than Tylenol. I don't drink. I don't take substances. I don't do anything that makes me feel like crap the next day. And I avoid negativity. That's the N. So I'm pretty much off social media, although I have to admit I am kind of addicted to TikTok tennis videos. But it's not me looking at my friends that have private jets and why don't I have a private jet kind of thing. I think social media can be a great tool. I just choose not to engage. I tend not to watch much of the news. I have a curated feed. I own a software company. 20 years ago, I would have came in here and I would have told you first. I own a software company. I have private equity partners. I would tell you how great I am. I don't really even talk about that. I don't lead with it because it's really not important to me. What's important to me is I've found a path of happiness, peace, contentment, joy, serenity, and I have practices that help me improve that aspect of my life and that I make other people's lives better. I'm a guy that people come to with problems, work problems, personal problems, family problems. That's important to me. And so I try to avoid negativity. And I'm sure we all know that person or people. As soon as you start talking to them, it's a complaint. Everything's a complaint. Everything's a problem. Everything's an issue. It's like, that stuff is contagious. I don't want that in my life, so I try to avoid those people. I try to avoid the news cycle unless it's relevant to what I do. And I just practice this stuff every day. It doesn't sound too exciting. It might be a little bit boring. People that know me well will sort of make fun of me. I won't go out to dinner past a certain time. I'm not going out to 9 o'clock cool dinners anymore, which is kind of funny because one of my first entrepreneurial ventures was promoting really big New Year's Eve nightclub parties with 3,000 people. So it is a pretty big shift into I'm the first one to sleep, I'm the first one up. And all of it just kind of works for me, and I suppose it could work for you, though you don't need to follow a smash. I would just say, and I'll shut up and end with this, we're the architects of our lives. Most of us don't walk around with any blueprints. We're just like, I hope today's a good day. And I used to do that for a really long time also, and I figured out that if I'm intentional about where I put my actions, my thoughts, my energy, my life, and a lot of people's lives are better. I'm like a trustee or involved in a lot of people's wills and this and that, and it's not like I'm proud of that, but I am proud of the idea that people know I'm solid. They can come to me for advice about business if they want, about doing service, about how I live my life. I try to lead by example. I don't tell people what to do because I barely know what to do with myself. I just try to follow a blueprint. I believe blueprints work. It's why Tylenol doesn't get reinvented every month, and there's formulas. If you figure out the formula that works for you, might be going to sleep late and waking up late. I don't, or exercising 3 days a week, or eating I don't know what it is. I just know that if you find the things that work, rinse, lather, repeat. Just keep doing them. And mindfulness, I'll end with this, is the foundation for me because our instincts, and my instincts, is go on autopilot. Right? Like follow the ego that wants to seek pleasure and ego-gratifying behaviors all the time. And it works for a while, but it leads to a superficial life, one that's ultimately going to hurt yourself and certainly not maximize and optimize who you can be as a person. That's been my experience anyway. So I've rambled for a while. I'll shut up. If you have questions and want to talk, let's do it.
Thank you. Alrighty, so you have a foundation, and we're all in this together, this being a human being. I always learn from you, and I'm always reminded of important things, so thank you. And yeah, let's spend a little time with questions that we might have. And if you would just say your name just before, as you begin.
Roxette, thank you so much for being here and everything that you shared was amazing. I'm writing my paper on spirituality and religion, so I'm very curious about that first aspect of the acronym that you shared with us. I wanted to know when you reached that level of spirituality and what does it mean for you to be spiritual, and how do you tie spirituality to mindfulness?
Again, it was about 11 or 12 years ago when sort of a few things coalesced. My mom dying, the work thing not giving me and delivering the eternal bliss I wanted, coping mechanisms I had not doing their job, and it was just being in a dark place. I feel like a lot of people I know that have developed a strong foundation in spiritual practices have been in dark places, because who wants to act according to spiritual principles every day? It's not all that fun, right? Be like, was I kind to that person in Starbucks? Do I need to go back and apologize? Am I being arrogant and maybe I should be humble? Like, I actually think about this stuff all the time, and it's only because I was in a really dark place that I don't ever want to go back to. And so without mindfulness, I have no awareness of my thinking, my emotions, my behaviors. It's just autopilot, right? Like, I want that. I'm very effective at getting that, whatever it is. I've got a legal education, finance background, started companies. I know how to persuade people. I have to be careful because I don't know if that is actually good for me. I don't know if that is actually what I really want. Maybe I want this. And as I start steamrolling and hurting people, there's consequences. So mindfulness is the key to be really aware of this process going on constantly. And spirituality for me is trying to get out of the ethereal, like, what is the universe? I mean, that's fun to talk about, but I need practical stuff. And those are the principles I mentioned before, and trying to align my thoughts, emotions, and behaviors to those principles every day. That's the practical application for me.
What is your best advice?
Adam?
Yes, Adam. Thank you so much for everything you spoke about. Really inspiring, and I really appreciate it. I know the rest of us do as well. For your acronym, what is your best advice, obviously, as an attorney and as somebody who's going to start studying for the bar exam, dealing with the stress of the bar exam and everything going on, just for practices to maintain healthy habits with regard to diet, exercise, refraining from alcohol and stuff like that. And the alcohol part is more like as you enter the legal profession. Obviously, I know during the bar exam you shouldn't be drinking anyways, but during bar prep. But I feel like as attorneys, there's a lot of pressure to go out and drink with your peers and drink with fellow attorneys. So what's your best advice in that realm?
So we've all heard the expression, usually when it comes to government security, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? Like, our minds are terrorists. I don't negotiate with my mind anymore. So I have practices that I apply every day, again, much to the annoyance of certain people in my life, that I just do. And my mind's like, I'm kind of tired today, I don't feel like exercising. It's like, I didn't ask you. You don't have a say here, right? It's like, I don't care if you want to or not. I just do. I want to eat chocolate cake in the middle of the day because in my office somebody put out a chocolate cake that looks delicious. It's like, we're not going to do that. That's going to taste. By the way, I eat chocolate several times a week. I'm not against chocolate, but I know if I eat it at noon, I'm going to be crashing in like 2 hours. And so my recommendation would be just going into the bar exam, which is very stressful, just set up a system and apply it. And don't do something that you can't apply, because sometimes that happens. But you can get up early and exercise. You can run 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you can have a eating practice and routine that's good for you, whatever that might be. And to be really mindful of not feeding the negativity. So at the end of the day, a big part of my day in, day out, which again, revolves around mindfulness, is when the negative thought pops up, the whole point of meditation is, for me anyway, it's not to induce a deep state of relaxation. That can be the result, but it's not the point. It's to become a lot more aware of our thoughts, emotions, right? So when the thought pops up, of, I'm going to fail the bar. I don't understand Will's, like, intestates. What does this mean? I remember, like, when I was studying some of these courses you took as a first year, or some of them you didn't even take. It's like, okay, I'm going to fail the bar is not a helpful thought. And I'm not going to start going down the path of, what if I fail the bar? When do I have to take it again? I'm going to lose that law firm job I have. I'm going to be an embarrassment. It's like, none of those are helpful thoughts. So have the thought. It's like, okay, thanks for the thought. Move on. Back to studying, back to exercise, back to whatever. So just being really intentional about your mental health, because it is super, super stressful. I think the bar exam it's the most difficult exam we'll take, right? Like, it's the most difficult. I took the securities exam. It was hard. I was like, bar exam was way harder. So just set your practices and just do them. Don't negotiate with terrorists. Our mind wants the easy way out, wants all our problems solved for us, wants everybody to be nice to us, wants everybody to do what we want it to do. It's like, well, that's not how the world works. So just figure out the 3, 4, 5 things you need to do every day to feel good, and just do them. Just don't negotiate.
Great, thank you.
Daniel, also thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. My question is also kind of on the topic of autonomy. Back when you were in New York and you had this opportunity to go to Boston and you came back, how did you sort of overcome what I imagine would be like a feeling of guilt and pressure to stay in that initial environment? And then also, if you had any, and then also, do you ever think back on like sort of that fork in the road, and how much does it fuel you to know that like you had an opportunity to leave when it could have easily been the other way?
Yeah, I had a lot of probably survivor guilt, a lot of unprocessed emotions. I used to think I had this this idea I was self-made. I was real proud of that for a while. I would tell people my mother didn't go to college, my father didn't go to college, my brother didn't graduate college, nobody was a professional. And I was like, I was like breaking my arm to pat myself on the back of how great and accomplished I was. But part of my journey was realizing, A, that's not true. I had an amazing mother that supported me. My stepfather, despite being volatile sometimes, was extremely supportive in other ways. But for a tremendous amount of luck, right? Like I'm so smart and I work really hard. Okay, you did. That's probably 10% of it, 20% of it. And just having a lot of humility and gratitude for somehow finding the way out. Like I wish I was like, well, I had the master plan. Like I knew I was going to turn this childhood experience and adversity into fuel, and part of that is what happened. And it's like, no, I just survival instinct and luck, and some people pushing me in the right direction, and innate skill, the ability to communicate and write. I didn't develop those things like initially; they were given to me. So yeah, I had for a bunch of years a lot of guilt and difficult emotions about a lot of childhood stuff that over time I had to just learn to overcome. And I heard somebody once say, it's such simple logic, but it's really powerful to me. How do I know it was meant to happen? Because it happened, right? Like we all have difficult stuff. We lose family members, there's traumas and tragedies. It's kind of trite to be like, oh, it was just meant to happen. Your dad was meant to die. It's like, oh, really? That doesn't sound too good. But the perseverating and ruminating about it for years and years and years of my life was so unproductive in so many ways that I had to ultimately just come to that conclusion. And I will use it to fuel me to not achieve more money or success, but just be a better version of me, give a better life to my kids. It's really important for me to be the dad to my kids that I wished I had, which a lot of times they're like, can you please leave me alone? Enough of your like wanting to spend more time with us. We're now teenagers. We have friends. So I think just a lot of work. Like this transformation didn't magically happen one night.
Erica, thank you so much for everything you shared and for being so vulnerable, I think, in your story. It just like watching the journey or the experience that you shared, I think it just gives a lot of weight to like everything that you said. Something that really resonated with me was how many things you have on your plate I had a question about mindfulness, how it relates to kind of dealing with everything that you have going on. So it feels like it seems like you have a lot of roles, like you're a father, you're a lawyer, you're a business person. You know, how do you use mindfulness, or how do you reconcile like being present with keeping track of all the future things that you have to do and all the past things that have happened, and kind of how do you live in the present moment without kind of forgetting about those things and letting things fall through the cracks?
Yeah, so with the past, I spent so many years ruminating on the past. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of self-help. I had a lot of baggage to figure out. I try not to ruminate in the past unless it's sort of meaningful to something I'm doing today. But one of the expressions I like is stop and drop. It's like, as soon as that thought came up of, can't believe, I still have a lot of friends whose parents are alive and they're celebrating 40 and 50 wedding anniversaries. Both my parents have been dead for a long time. I'm like, oh, you know, poor me, poor. It's like, not a useful, helpful thought at all. Like, stop the thought and drop it, move on. Because our minds like to live in the past. And living in the past for me is incredibly unproductive and certainly not consistent with my goals of being happy and content. In terms of using mindfulness to manage my life, I'm actually like, I have an amazing amount of free time because I'm very good at focusing and for 40 minutes at a time, 50 minutes at a time, and getting a lot done, and then sort of pulling out. And mindfulness has helped me with that too. But when I'm focused, I'm trying not to do 2 or 3 things, multitask, and I'm just really in it. And I'm very good at prioritizing the highest impact things I could work on. So our company now has 400 employees. There's a lot of part of my company I know nothing about, which is hard. You know, I'm like, it used to be just me and my co-founder, and then this person and that person. Like, I don't know 250 people that work in my company. Never talked to them. I don't know what they do. I know what they do at a high level. I don't know what they do day in and day out. There's a part of me that wants to go micromanage and control and go tell people how to do their jobs. And in the early days, I did. Not very good, right? Like, not productive. So I spent a lot of time thinking about where can I make the biggest impact on the business using my skill that uniquely qualifies me to do that, and go do that. And then I zoom out and I find like, wow, that was a pretty effective use of time. And then I focus on something else. I don't know, I find like I have pretty good balance. And balance is important to me because I want to spend time with my family. I want to play tennis. I want to do community service stuff. I got to meditate. I got a lot of stuff I got to do. So I can't be micromanaging other people, which isn't to say that I live on like this pink cloud of everything's perfect all of the time. Like in my business, we've got, in healthcare technology, the government is debating changing the rules of the game, and there's going to be a big announcement Monday from Medicare, and a month ago when they announced that this might be coming, I was not in a great headspace for a few days. Projecting the future, projecting how bad this is going to be, it's like, I just got to remember what I learned, right? I spent so much time learning about Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and mindfulness and meditation, and then as soon as something happens, gone. It's like, oh my God, we're going to have to pivot the business. My private equity partners are going to be mad at me. I didn't cause this. What are we going to do? I had to zoom out. So do I have any control of this? No. What can I control? How I behave, my attitude, how we might have to pivot, what tactics we can employ. I could think about those things. I can't start ruminating about it. I can't believe Medicare is changing the rules of the game for me. It's like, no, not for me. So I apply mindfulness to everything I do because I have to ask myself, is this right? Am I seeing clearly? One of my favorites is, does this matter? I'm very prone to getting irritated by friends, colleagues, much less so now over the years. Do I need to pull over on 95 and respond to this email right now? Because I need to set it straight. Like, they have clearly misinterpreted the facts and reality. It's like, nope, I've done that. You know, like I could be very aggressive. Like, I look like a nice clean-cut guy, but I grew up fighting with people, right? It's like, I want to get into the brawl, except that is not very productive, right? and helpful to anybody. So I apply mindfulness to everything I do to ask myself those questions. Then you.
Sam Kramer. So I like your acronym. How do you balance the parts of the acronym that are inherently at odds with each other? So like autonomy versus comfort, or service versus avoiding negativity. I understand that gratitude and mindfulness will have an interplay, but how do you kind of navigate that?
I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure I see them in conflict. So give me an example of how they're in conflict.
So you mentioned that avoiding negativity,
Uh-huh.
and I understand that it's kind of avoiding feeding the negativity, but also you, one of the things that brings you pride is that, or that you're proud of, is that people come to you with their problems and you enjoy helping them with that. And so how do you avoid negativity and not feed negativity when you're kind of searching to help other people?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's just a matter of the perspective and situation. So when I say I avoid negativity, there's people that just like to complain, criticize, judge. They're not asking for my help. They just want me to listen to them. Hey, do you know what that person did? That person's a real, well, I'm like, I don't care, that guy. I'm not getting into the trench with you to talk about somebody else, which is different than somebody's in a negative headspace and they come to me and they're like, hey, can you help me navigate this and work my way out of it? They're not asking me to participate in their negativity. They're asking for a solution. So I don't see that in conflict, and that's where I think I could be helpful. I'm like, okay, let's talk about what you're thinking and how it's affecting you and see if there's a way out of it, versus somebody who wants me just to participate in negativity and judging and criticizing, which I don't do. Make sense?
Yeah, probably a bad example, but yeah, for my part.
Hi, I'm Christina. Your words are very moving, so we're all very appreciative you're here. I was curious, I know that you've had this lifestyle for the past 10, 11 years. If you were to go back to when you were in that dark place, or even to a novice to mindfulness, what are some advice you would give that person of small, things you can implement into your life to start making changes in their mindset, or just what worked for you at the very beginning of it all?
First thing I would do is I would take a class on mindfulness with a great professor. So you're doing the right thing, seriously. It's like I had no awareness this concept even existed. I think meditating for 5 minutes a day, just if you don't have a practice, just doing it a few minutes a day to start seeing the tyrant, what I call the tyrant, the bully, in action, you will start to become a lot more aware, because at the end of the day, it's all about cultivating a higher degree of self-awareness of this process that's going on, this operating system. It's like a computer operating system with a virus that we all have that's just operating all day, and we're not addressing it. So my recommendation would be, this class is amazing. Pay attention to what you learn here. Practice the principles that you're being taught, and meditate for 5 minutes a day, and journal and see because most of our thoughts follow the same handful of patterns, just different flavors all day long, right? Like mine are comfort, control, security, significance. How do I get more of that? How do I remove people in my way that are blocking, impeding my goals? Just start paying attention, and then do some practices every day that are good for your mental health and your well-being, whether it's exercise, eating well, being with friends, being of service, whatever. It's important that they resonate and they matter to you, because for years I'd be the guy that would read an Eckhart Tolle book and go talk to somebody at a cocktail party about what I read. I don't know what this means. I'm certainly not practicing it. But I'm pretty intentional about practicing the stuff that matters to me. So find stuff that matters, but start with meditation. Just paying attention to your thoughts and seeing how this tyrant leads us around all day. The mind's a great tool, but it's not a good master.
If I might, just two quick questions on that, and then sensitive to our time and your time, because you've been very generous with yours. if there's time for a question from this side in a moment, because then that would be nice. But just two quick things, because you're zeroing in on practice, of course, and one of the takeaways from this class is there's a lot of things we've talked about, et cetera, but do we practice, right? And I think part of what you're speaking to is 10 years or plus, and you haven't missed a day, right? And whether one embraces that or some variation on that works for them, as you've said, there's a lot of action there. And in response to Christina's wonderful question, you could have said a lot of things, and you were like, practice. Just would you say that because many of them are 2.5 months in to practice, say, or they've been practicing beforehand, maybe a year or so in, that in your experience, the first couple of years especially, that there was this cumulative growing realization of seeing things clearly, that you saw things more clearly and more clearly and more clearly than you had even when you began seeing things more clearly. And maybe it has plateaued, like there's a certain level of insight and realization, and now it's maintaining it. But since they're very early on, is there this delta that's moving in a way that can be useful to keep at it? And in many ways, does it sometimes take care of other things, just as an end unto itself? That awareness, you don't have to be as, got to have an answer, because somehow you're more answers are more available.
Yeah, I think definitely. In the beginning, it's so new. It was so new to me. It's mind-blowing that the first year or 2 years was very revelatory and extremely challenging. To sit for 5 minutes and 7 minutes and 10 minutes. It's like, again, our mind is so powerful and we can do extraordinary things, but just sitting still, like I need something to do. I need to email somebody or watch a TikTok tennis video. And one of the biggest epiphanies that has continued to grow and evolve for me as an understanding is, and maybe you've heard this, but we're not our thoughts. We're observers of our thoughts. And the more I meditate day in, day out, the more I get to see that I don't know where these thoughts come from. I think there's a phrase or expression in Buddhism, we want to have our thoughts like writing in water. So if you go like this in water, you might see an initial for a second, but then it disappears. It's how do I train my mind to see a thought, recognize it, and not feed it to become a bigger thought and a story and then an emotion. So in the beginning, it was just all so new and all so hard. And what the funny thing is, I do every night between 6:30 and 7:30 is kind of like my time, and it's still a challenge. I've not missed a day. I really haven't. And it's still a challenge. I'm like, when is this thing going to get really easy? I like things that are easy. But I also learn, and practice what I talk about is I don't negotiate with my mind. It's like, I don't feel like doing it. Does this really work? I know it works because there's a lot of people that rely on me for advice, jobs. Whenever there's a conflict in my company, even though I'm the co-founder, I'm involved in kind of a discrete area, but if there's an issue, I get brought in to resolve the issue because I tend to have the most objectivity way of dealing with people, which wasn't always the case. So it's all, I think, in the beginning, it's like this. I like to think it's incremental. There are times, I think a couple years ago, I sat down with you and I'm like, tell me exactly how much time you meditate. And what do you do? Oh, I don't know exactly what you do. As soon as you sit down, tell me what you do. And I read books. I go through phases where I'll read 10, 20 books on Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, meditation. I want to know more, the secrets. I listen to podcasts like it's my job. Everywhere I drive, I walk and podcast. And then sometimes I'm like, just relax. Like this is my obsessive mind that has to get better and be the best at everything. I like to say that my ego doesn't want to just be loved and liked. It needs to be admired, adored. I need to be the most special human being on the planet. And that awareness is super powerful. It's like, oh, I see where this thought's coming from. Childhood insecurity, fears. You think if you get more money, success, recognition, accolades, you will be safe and your family will be safe. That's not true. It's fine, objective, move on. Like, oh, that's helpful. So it continues to provide incremental benefit, but certainly the first couple of years are so revelatory because it was really just brand new.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, First of all, it's 11:35. I know
Yeah.
that we did pick a time that I know you've got plans.
I've got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Louis.
Hi, Louis Cortez. Thank you for being here. It's extremely helpful and enlightening. I would love to know if you could elaborate more into, you spoke about judgment and techniques that you use to handle judgment, especially your close ones, your loved ones, right? I mean, I think we all started this journey where even us, starting, we're skeptical about this, right? Where this was gonna take us. So there's a lot of people around me that, they just don't understand why we choose to practice a certain, modality of mindfulness. And there's resistance, right? There's judgment, resistance. They might think that we're rigid. And especially, the people really close to you, and that affects us. I mean, at least it affects me. So I wonder how you go through life without, burning bridges, building relationships, but still staying true to yourself.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've definitely, I don't know if I've burned bridges, but I've changed friends because the way I live and operate is different. So when it comes to judgment for myself, I'm careful about the words that come out of my mouth. And mindfulness gives me that filter, that space between thought and reaction. Do I need to say this? Is it going to help anybody? Is it true? Is it hurtful? Right? So I will process, because you know what? Judging people feels good sometimes, right? It makes you feel superior, you're better. But I know, again, that's why my mind's doing it and wants to do it, so I'm just careful. And when it comes to other people judging me, I've seen the benefits of the way I operate, and it's extraordinary, right? I'm not saying every day my life is peak happiness, but I don't have the ones and twos. Everything to me is on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't go into the 1s and 2s and 3 zones anymore. And if people don't like that about me, if people don't like I won't go out to dinner at 9 o'clock and meet them at Live at midnight, I'm 50 years old with 2 daughters, right? I have a lot of friends. I have diverse friends. I have I have a bunch of friends that are in their 20s and 30s, and I have friends that are in their 70s, because I'm always trying to learn from people, and I like different perspectives. And I think in my earlier part of the journey, rigidity was definitely a word that would come up. I'm a bit more flexible because I don't want it to be all about me and my practices. But if somebody doesn't like what I do, or it's usually a threat to their behaviors that they're having difficulty reconciling in their lives, sometimes those people will ultimately come to me and ask for advice, and sometimes people are so uncomfortable they don't want to spend time with you, and that's okay. And that could be hurtful, but I always like when they say, if the plane's going down, put your oxygen mask on first. So I put my oxygen mask on first, and it's not really my problem if they don't like the way I'm acting, because it works for me, it works for my family.
One last question. Somebody over here? Hold on, Roxette. Somebody who hasn't asked a question. Yes, go ahead.
It's been a pleasure hearing you talk today. Thank you. And what I'm really interested in, because I'm going to be doing a paper on how mindfulness can actually help you with your negotiations. Like, it helps you negotiate more effectively. You have a successful business. You've been practicing mindfulness for 10 years. Do you have any insight on how it's helped you, if it's helped you?
Yeah, so I used to think about negotiation as kind of a zero-sum game. I win, you lose, right? I get what I want, you don't. Ultimately, everybody wants what they want, right? Just zoom out from business, but in human nature, right? There's billions of people, 7 or 8 billion people walking around that want what they want. And if everybody walks around wanting what they want, there's going to be conflict. In a negotiation, there's usually not one side that's 100% right and on the other side is 0% right. And there's middle ground, and there's the way I tend to approach it, and I just had a difficult situation with another company, and I'm like, listen, I called, he sends an email. Like, old me likes to engage by email, right? I could craft a nice, sarcastic, intellectually superior, blah, 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 and then start the little battle. Call him up. hey, let's be reasonable here, okay? You guys did A, B, and C. I think that was overstep boundaries. I'll tell you why. I'm not going to be unreasonable here. I'm not going to ask for things I think I can get. I'm going to ask what I think is fair. I would ask you to take the same approach. Some people might come back and see that as a weakness or overstep. But again, I'm being mindful of, A, it's not a zero-sum game. If you want to successfully negotiate, you have to help people get what they want in a way where they think they're coming away from it as a winner. If you don't, you might sometimes impose your will and get everything you want, but you're not going to have a good reputation, and you're not going to have a good relationship out of that. There's a lot of times, and Scott knows this, where lawyers that are adversarial with each other in a case fight hard for their clients, but are so respectful of each other and the way they comport and behave, they will refer cases to each other in the future. Why? Because there's a way to negotiate with grace and humility and fairness, and there's a way not. And if you're not mindful, like as a lawyer, lawyer's a difficult job, right? Because you're adversarial. You're paid by a client to win. Litigation is the hardest. There's ways to approach it where you're not attacking your enemy, you're being reasonable, you're trying to apply some spiritual principles that matter, like not lying, exaggerating, concealing. And if you approach a negotiation of, like, I always tell people, like, I want you to feel like you won, and sometimes take a little bit less money in a deal than I can get. I used to not behave like that. I used to behave like, I am going to get everything I can get and then be really proud of my abilities. But I found that's not a great way to build relationships, and nobody feels good after that. So just be mindful about not getting your ego involved, which it's hard in the legal world, because there's going to be a lot of lawyers out there that are going to not be all that spiritual, and it's going to take some, I think, work to take the high road. So.
Alrighty.
Just quickly, I just want to know which podcast you listen to.
Oh my God, do you want me to open up here?
Yes, share the list.
So I like Rich Roll, Tim Ferriss, Dr. Huberman. He's a neuroscientist.
What was the first one?
Rich Roll. His name is Rich Roll. Sam Harris, who you might have been exposed to here. He has an amazing podcast. I'll open up here. You've asked.
Roxanne. Good question. Good question. You're getting data.
Yeah, those are probably, I'd say, the most consistent with this theme.
And these are related to, you said you've learned a lot about Eastern philosophy.
Well, like Tim Ferriss, do you guys know who Tim Ferriss is? Tim Ferriss interviews world-class performers in a lot of different disciplines. Could be athletes, business people, tech startup, billionaires, artists, creative types, and generals, and just learns what they do. And he wrote a great book. He's written several great books, Tool of Titans, but what do you do every day? What are your practices? What are your principles? How did you get from being a dropout in high school to a 5-star general? Right? Rich Roll takes a slightly different approach in talking to, he's a endurance athlete, but he had a major transformation in his life. He's actually a former lawyer. So just, I like experiences, which is why I didn't come in here and tell you about, to meditate, you need to sit like this, cross your arms, 18 minutes a day, because you could read other kinds of books for that. I like hearing people that have personal stories that have used techniques and practices and tactics to improve them.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here with you guys. You're really super lucky to have this class. I mean it, because if you figure out how to navigate this, egg-shaped dome sitting on your shoulders, life gets a whole lot better. So thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I think you should start a podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or write a biography.
Thank you.
You've deeply enriched our time together today. I think you've really helped reinforce and add to the semester-long conversation. Thank you.